Well, turning back to Ukraine and just the aid that's going to
Mm,
Ukraine, I heard you mention in another interview that a lot of the money and weapons that is going to Ukraine is not actually even reaching the Ukrainian government or reaching the front lines. At least it's going
mm.
somewhere else. So could you just go into that a little bit? Like, how much of these billions and billions of dollars and this advanced weaponry do we think is actually going to this conflict against Russia, and how much is ending up on the black market?
I mean, it's really difficult to tell the scale of the corruption and embezzlement that's going on. I mean, the arms and aid, quote unquote, shipments to Ukraine just get bigger and bigger. There's billions is ending up in Kiev. There seems to be very little control over where it goes, and very little safeguards in place to prevent abuses. There are now a few US military advisors in Ukraine who are specifically charged with making sure everything reaches where it's meant to reach. Again, I mean, I don't think that's the necessary infrastructure to ensure that this happens. I mean, there's been some acknowledgement in the media that the corruption and profiteering is going on. There was of course, I believe it was in August, a CBS documentary that talked about how only 30% of what gets sent to Ukraine actually makes it to the front. And then there was a huge online backlash against CBS. So they pulled the documentary, and they from their website temporarily, and then they reinstated it to claim that, things are a lot better now, which is reassuring. But I mean, if you actually look at there are a number of interviews which have gotten zero mainstream media traction with people who fought in the International Legion, that was created on, I think it was February 27th. It was to attract foreign fighters and mercenaries to go and fight in Ukraine. And pretty much every single one of these interviews that I've seen, they say that they saw like embezzlement, fraud, and corruption on an absolutely massive scale, where it was very professionalized, where even in the event that weapons arrived, another van would turn up and then take some away. There was one, I believe it was an American merc, who said that he reported these matters to the SBU. The SBU did nothing. The commanders who were implicated in this would threaten to send people on suicide missions to silence them. In one case, there was a unit of foreign soldiers who the commanders didn't like very much, so they sent them across a minefield without telling them there were any mines under the soil. I mean, it just seems to be an environment in which you cannot raise these concerns, and if you do, there are very, very, very dire consequences. But I mean, where I am now, in Serbia, this entire the Balkans throughout the 90s was a major target for US weapons, and they were flown in to fight against the Serbs, basically, in Croatia and Bosnia, and unaccountably vast shipments of weapons were made every single week. That one of the reasons that were flown in on CIA planes. One of the reasons they were so big is because they knew that the second that the weaponry arrived, between 20 to 50% of it would be sold pretty much immediately. I met someone in Sarajevo this summer, that's the capital of Bosnia, who said that when he was growing up, his entire family, including like his grandma and like his sisters, were involved in a gun smuggling operation because there were no other jobs. So that it was like a major employer, and those weapons circulate to this day. They were used in the war in Kosovo in the late 90s. They've the international arms black market is implausibly fluid. Like I mean, there was a report a few years back that there was a teenage drug gang in the north of England that had the kind of elite machine guns that were used by British special forces in Afghanistan. Like how did they end up there? And so I mean, I think one of the major concerns is, you want to talk about blowback. like effectively, I mean, it does seem fairly inevitable now that Russia is going to, emerge victorious. It's going to be a very long, grinding war, but it seems fairly inevitable. And in that context, you're going to have a lot of very pissed off, embittered former fighters, among them many neo-Nazis, of course, who have ready access to vast amounts of weaponry. And I mean, there's already my Grayzone colleague Alex Rubinstein has reported on another story that has gotten zero mainstream traction of a neo-Nazi cell in Italy, comprised of people who fought in Ukraine, who were planning terrorist attacks. So that's already before the war was even over. This is a reality and a major threat.
Yeah, no, we've seen blowback again and again. Actually, we've been talking about Iranian drones being used by Russia. I believe that the whole reason that Iran even has drones is because they captured a U.S. drone being used in Iraq and Afghanistan previously. And we've seen not just all the weapons that were left in Afghanistan recently, but also the funding of the Mujahideen and how that created Al Qaeda and whatnot. So it just seems as though there's no like long-term thinking, at least on the part of maybe people in the media or whatnot. Probably in the intelligence community there is some long-term thinking, but yeah, it's just it's remarkable how there's no thought into how these weapons are inevitably going to end up in the hands of these people who were involved in the right sector and the Azov battalion and the Adar battalion, and we could see international right-wing terrorism because of the weapons that we're sending to Ukraine now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I mean, there's an absolutely fascinating interview, which is there's a Telegram channel run by this guy who goes by the name of John Fearless, and he highlights human rights abuses in Ukraine. He conducted this interview with an American neo-Nazi called Boneface, because he has his face is tattooed to make it resemble a skull. He was jailed in the US for effectively trying to create a fascist terror army, and that was going to carry out terror attacks and carry out pursue insurrection. But like he in this interview, he makes a number of very interesting comments where he states that he first went to Ukraine in 2014 because the neo-Nazi movement globally is highly coordinated. So his local network in the US was very aware of the huge presence of far right nationalists in Maidan, and as such, he ventured over there, and then he met a large number of skinheads from all over the world who had similarly been attracted by the prospect of creating a kind of neo-Nazi state in Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, I think that as the US has done many times in the past to its allies, it will throw Ukraine under a bus. I mean, that day seems to be getting sooner. I mean, there's slightly more critical reporting emerging in the mainstream. There are officials, both anonymous and openly, stating that they think that Ukraine's going to lose, and that Zelensky needs to get serious about negotiating. So I mean, yes, that day will come, and there will be a lot of people who are extremely angry. Again, another interesting historical parallel here is, I mentioned the arms shipments to Bosnia and Croatia. Those CIA planes were also bringing in large amounts of Mujahideen fighters from all over the world, and the Bosnian Mujahideen quickly gained a reputation for carrying out the most brutal acts, perpetrating false flags, killing their own people and claiming the Serbs did it to try and facilitate US airstrikes. And at the end of the war, when their kind of utility was all used up, the CIA started taking them out. They started assassinating the Mujahideen fighters there, and then so they fled to Kosovo. Most of them tried to. En route there, they ended up getting arrested in Albania because the CIA had basically put burn notices on them. A large number of them were deported back to their home countries, including, I think, the largest contingent was Cairo, where there was a huge, I think it was the biggest terror trial in Egyptian history. There was dozens of the former Mujahideen were tried for plotting terrorist acts. It was this betrayal which led bin Laden to place the fatwa on the US, which one way or another led to 9/11. So yeah, I mean, the historical precedent for a major blowback is there.
So let me ask you this. Do you think that any of these weapons through the black market are actually reaching Russia or mercenaries in Russia?
Yeah, there have been reports that some of the biggest customers for black market weaponry are indeed the Russians. I mean, they seem to be particularly interested in NATO and anti-tank and anti-missile weapons. And this was, the Mercs that I mentioned have said that this seemed to be, what was this seems to be what was disappearing in vans and stuff. I mean, what's really interesting as well is, I think that the narrative on weaponry to Ukraine has shifted considerably as well. And it's like, when the stuff, if we cut back say 6 months, almost every week we were told that there was a new kind of Wunderwaffen that was going to win the war for Ukraine. Oh, it's the HIMARS, like blah blah. And there were people at the time who said that actually these weapons are not very good. And then the way that they're made means that they'll break quite easily. And so that there's a vast amount of weaponry in Ukraine which requires direct US professional servicing to keep working. So I mean that's another kind of hidden cost of all of these of all of these weapons shipments. But I mean, as well, I think that one of the reasons that the states are starting to pull back ever so slightly is because it's getting increasingly difficult for them to claim that they're not belligerents in the war. I mean, it's some of my reporting for the Grayzone on, leaked documents exposing how senior British spies they planned the bombing of Kerch Bridge. They mapped out all of these different operations to be carried out in and around Crimea. They are constructing via a company called Prevail Partners, a secret partisan terror army on behalf of the Odessa SSU, and then mapping out operations for them to carry out. How can London plausibly claim that they're not involved in this? It's just it's so brazen. And I think that that there is a cognizance that if a state is directly tied to a major attack on Russian infrastructure, say like Nord Stream 2, then Russia will retaliate against them. And the attitude of some of the more insane kind of hawkish elements within Washington and London, they think that the way to win is just not back down and just keep escalating and ratcheting up tension and making things more dangerous, because they think that Russia's going to eventually going to yield. But there's no sign of it yet, and it's like I am by no means am I a supporter of Russia or indeed the war, but it's like or their war effort. But if you actually break it down, since February they've been Moscow has been subject to the most wide-ranging array of sanctions in history, which are intended to damage it economically and lead to the collapse of Putin's government. Ukraine has been getting billions and billions and billions from all over the Western world in weaponry and aid. It's getting non-stop flow of intelligence from MI6 and the CIA. It's getting elite training and all sorts of other support. And
Starlink.
And Starlink as well. And it's just this has not stopped the Russians. This hasn't stopped them at all. I mean, it might have slowed them down slightly. It's probably prolonged. I mean, we know that Ukraine was very much open to negotiations and had accepted a provisional peace plan in April that was under the terms of which Russia would withdraw from all of Ukraine, and Donetsk and Luhansk would be independent republics. And that was scuttled at the last minute by Boris Johnson, who flew to Kiev and said, "We're not ready for you to back down yet." So if this is being needlessly prolonged, the result seems to be pretty much inevitable. And the longer it goes on, the more dangerous it is for the entire world. I mean, Russia has not indicated that it will use nuclear weapons. Its nuclear doctrine is it only fires if it's fired upon. But I mean, even then, it's like if there is a sufficient threat to Russian interests, it's like, well, if you're going to do things like map out plans to blow up Kerch Bridge, which is a hugely important symbol from the Kremlin's perspective, then that becomes a risk. that becomes, a legitimate, a legitimate prospect, in the sense of, well, that there is a, there's an action and a reaction.